Hello traders, my name is Andrew Henderson, Nomad Capitalist, nomadcapitalist.com, here at one of my homes, back at home after some travels, and wanted to talk today about citizenship renunciation and specifically what you need to think about. And for this video, I may actually refer to some notes. I do these for most of the time very extemporaneously, but I made a list of 9 different things that you need to consider if you're planning on giving up your citizenship. Now, this is largely designed to speak to people who are U.S. citizens and that may want to renounce their citizenship for any number of reasons. I've talked about my own experience there. It's certainly not something for everybody. It's certainly not something that you have to do or should do out of anger. But U.S. citizens might want to consider this if they're living the nomad capitalist lifestyle. Other folks might want to consider it. We had a guy once who worked with us who was Austrian, but qualified for another EU citizenship as well as a South American citizenship. And the question was, would you be willing to renounce Austrian citizenship for the other two? So these questions, these thoughts, these considerations will apply to U.S. citizens mainly, but I think a lot of them would apply to someone who may be looking to create a passport portfolio and they're limited by dual citizenship in their country. So the first thing that I think you need to consider when you're looking at the issue of renunciation is, what are you going to do differently? You know, it's one thing to say, I don't like the Vietnam War, or I don't agree with the Iraq War, I'm going to renounce my U.S. citizenship. You know, how does that improve your life? Listen, I have a video on YouTube explaining my decisions, and part of it is I feel much more aligned now on a personal level. And so I understand the decision to do that, but obviously, if that's your only reason, then you need to figure out, hey, how is my life going to be different? Right now, for example, cryptocurrency investors, there are folks who want to renounce U.S. citizenship because they want to participate in ICOs or they want to hold certain types of crypto investments and they can't as a U.S. citizen. I know folks who already live overseas, they're dual citizens, maybe they have a really good T or A passport and they just can't get any kind of bank accounts. They can't participate in investments. I have one guy whose non-U.S. citizen business partner is paying U.S. tax as a result of working with him. So what would be different if you renounced? Well, in those cases, your non-U.S. partner wouldn't be paying U.S. tax. You'd be able to open those bank accounts. You'd be able to invest in those ICOs. So I think that's the important question. When someone comes to me and I'm helping them, I always ask questions like that because I want to get to the root of things. I like to approach this from somewhat of a clinical angle where I really get down to the root, because what you're going to do afterwards is important. If you're a U.S. citizen, the second thing to consider is going to be the exit tax. There are 3 different ways to trigger the exit tax. We've got a video on that separately here on YouTube. I don't want to repeat that content here. But are you going to be subject to an exit tax as a U.S. citizen? If so, how do you plan for that? Are you married or you're not married? Is there a gifting strategy you can employ? If you're planning on renouncing in the future, or you may be renouncing in the future, what can you do now over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years if you don't need to renounce tomorrow to possibly reduce that exit tax? That's something that you definitely want to consider. How does that exit tax apply to you? A lot of cryptocurrency guys, again, you see, one day they've got $5 million and they're going to trigger an exit tax because all their money's on exchanges. The next day, their cryptos drop and now they have $2 million. And so there may be just some general market and investment things you should take into account. But exit tax has to be considered. Number 3, what's your tax situation going to be after you renounce? So, I think what you have to be careful is that you don't jump from the fire back into the frying pan. There is a way to renounce your citizenship and to go and to pay no tax or to pay very little tax. What some people have to keep in mind, I had a guy who had a business selling stuff on Amazon, and he was actually benefiting from a tax treaty where if he was no longer a citizen of his country, he wouldn't have that treaty anymore and his taxes would go up. So it's important to make sure that if you renounce, you don't actually end up paying more. It's also important to understand that, if you don't have the U.S. to rely on, will some other country want to tax you? Or where are you going to be spending your time? How do you make sure that they're not going to tax you? Where's your company going to be based? How is that going to work in with your new status? So there's a lot of considerations to make sure that both you as one person and your company as a separate entity will be taxed the way that you want. That may be 0, that may be minimal, that may be, hey, I just want to live in France and pay a fortune. That's okay as long as you know what you're getting into. So that brings me to consideration number 4, where will you go? Where are you going to spend your time? So for me, the last 4 years of my U.S. citizenship, I spent 6 days in the country. So where I was going to go was not an issue. However, there are people who come to me asking for help, saying, hey, Andrew, I live in the United States. And again, I have one of those issues I mentioned earlier, or some other issue. I'm willing to move outside of the United States in order to solve that problem. I don't know where I'm going to go. And so I have to work with them and figure out where they're going to go. Where are they going to get a residence permit? Do they want to live in the country where their other passport or other passports are issued? Right? People who buy these economic citizenships in the Caribbean usually don't want to live there. Most of those islands are not tax-free. So again, you don't want to go from the frying pan or the fire to the frying pan. So where are you going to go? What's your residence permit strategy? What are the tax implications there? How do you get that? Again, if you're renouncing in the US, is it going to be more difficult to live in that country? Are you going to be doing visa runs? Are you just going to be a perpetual traveler? You could then extrapolate that into how am I going to get visas if I need some? We'll cover that in a minute. But where are you going to spend your time is an important consideration. I have guys who have come to me having already renounced their citizenship and saying, I don't know what to do now. I need to put together a kind of a post-renunciation strategy, and I think that it's worth considering that. Had they come to me before they renounced, I would have sat down and done all this with them. So step number 5, consideration number 5, is where are you going to bank? Some U.S. banks may not want you anymore. I think that's rather rare. U.S. banks generally are pretty open to foreigners. There may be some banks around the world, oddly enough, that may make your life a bit more difficult if you are no longer a U.S. citizen. At the very least, they're going to want you to update them on that status, and you're going to want to update that on that status once you don't want your stuff reported anymore. Obviously, where you're going to bank may be easier. You're going to have more options. There are certain banks that don't want even former U.S. citizens, at least for a certain period of time. So where you're going to bank is going to be important. And for some people, they say, hey, if I'm not a U.S. citizen, I don't want my money in the U.S. I want it all out. Maybe you want to keep your money, maybe you don't. There's a lot of considerations with what you're going to do with your money. Consideration number 6, how are you going to travel? What are your visa-free travel privileges? We've got a lot of videos here on YouTube, and I recommend that you check them all out. Recommend that you subscribe as well, where we talk about how to create a passport portfolio, how to enhance your visa-free travel. Again, if you're the citizen of the United States and you're planning on renouncing, or if you're Japanese or Austrian or some other T or A country that doesn't allow for dual, you have to consider, what are my travel privileges going to be? For me, obviously I lost a few travel privileges. And when I look at it now, not only do I want to be a bit more settled in my life, I don't want to be in 35 countries a year anymore. I have all the knowledge from going to all those countries over the last 10 or 11 years, but if I had to get a visa to go to New Zealand, is that the end of the world for me? Not really. If I wanted to go to New Zealand, I probably would have by now in 33 years. But that does have to be considered. Where do you need to spend time? Do you attend conferences in a certain country? If you attend conferences in the UK, does your passport get you into the UK? If you have friends and family somewhere that you want to see and you're used to just going to Australia every year, will you need a visa for those? I do a video called Ucuna, U-C-U-N-A, where I talk about the 5 most difficult countries to get back into for people who renounce. Definitely check that out, but it's worth considering. Now, a lot of people think that getting a visa is the end-all, be-all. Even my parents who travel, they're just used to everywhere they turn up, here's my passport, get a stamp, on you go. That doesn't mean that getting visas are difficult. I did a video on doing a Thai visa. Not difficult at all. So getting visas is not the end of the world, but you have to be aware of how that works. What are the places that you visit, you do business, you fly through, etc. That all has to be considered, and I think that's why having a passport portfolio is important. Consideration number 7, if you're a U.S. citizen, how will you come back to the United States? If you want to, if you need to. Again, if you're speaking at conferences, if you have friends, if you have family. I had one guy say, Andrew, I don't want to get a visa for my mother's funeral. How are you going to do that? There's a lot of nuance to that. We talk about that when I sit down with folks and we put together their strategy, but how are you going to come back to the United States? There are certain things that you need to do. Consideration number 8, again, if you're a U.S. citizen, what are your U.S. assets? A lot of people have mistaken beliefs about what happens with your U.S. assets when you renounce. Some people think that only the U.S. assets are taxed as part of the exit tax. Wrong. So are the foreign ones. Some people think you can't have U.S. assets when you renounce. Wrong. There may be special tax treatment. In some cases, the tax treatment for non-citizens is good, such as with bank accounts. In some situations, the tax treatment for non-U.S. citizens is worse, such as in some property deals. So if you're holding real estate in the United States that you rent or that you plan to sell, you want to fix and flip, whatever, it's worth considering how that's going to be affected in your renunciation or even in your green card relinquishment. But there are a lot of misunderstandings there, and generally people are pleasantly surprised at how they can handle their U.S. assets, but there are things that you need to think about. And really the ninth consideration is a rather blanket consideration that I would call future changes. What's going to change in the future? I wrote a blog post a while back about how I believe that visa-free travel is only going to get easier for T or B passports in the future. You know, if you're Rwandan, for example, your travel privileges probably aren't going to get that much easier. If you are Montenegrin, I think that your travel privileges are going to get better. And I'm seeing that with actually one of the passports that I hold, where actually new countries are coming on and offering us visa-free travel. You also see other countries that are coming out and issuing e-visas. More countries are coming out, and rather than having to mail your passport or go to an embassy, you just fill out a form online. So a lot of procedures are being liberalized, and this is why, again, having a passport portfolio is a good thing. But there may be certain countries, there's been speculation that the EU might be a bit harder on certain countries' citizens, perhaps some of the citizenship by investment programs due to their banking transparency issues there. I don't necessarily put a lot of stock into that, but again, it's important to be prepared. And this is why, again, having options is good. Having 2 passports and then getting rid of one may not be the best strategy. Having 3 or 4 passports, or having the 2 and then getting rid of the one and then being on the way to the other 2 is maybe a good strategy. If you have passports that don't have EU access or you feel may lose it in the future, maybe you get one of the investor visas and you lock up the EU and now you don't have to worry about your passports. What could change in the future? Could travel privileges change? I tend to think that if you get the right passport, you won't have an issue. Could the US or Australia or other countries make it more difficult? Trump has talked about limiting certain migration programs in the United States. Could that be an issue? US and other countries have talked about logging into your social media accounts if you want to get a visa. I don't see why that would necessarily be an issue, but it's certainly something that may be a bit more difficult. Maybe certain changes just make you not want to go certain countries or make you not want to invest in certain places. Is there imposition of some kind of global tax? These things all have to be considered, and I really hesitate to put too much stock into speculation. I encourage people to be prepared. When someone comes to me, we really get them organized in terms of covering all the bases that they need, but not covering mythical bases that just make them feel good and that waste money and time. But it's important to understand and to work with someone who understands, where's the world heading? I think that in general, I even made a video about it, being a T or B citizen and being a nomad capitalist, living this lifestyle, I think is going to get better. There will be some things that change and you're going to have to stay on top of it. But if you're planning on changing your citizenship status, these are 9 things that you definitely want to consider. Definitely, you should also consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out lots of videos on how to live this lifestyle, how to legally reduce taxes, how to increase your options with second passports, second residencies, traveling around, making investments around the world. And if you'd like some help with this stuff, if you're saying, you know what, I want to renounce my citizenship, or maybe I do, I'm not sure, I want to solve this problem, I want to pay less in tax, I want to do whatever. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com, and we have a little button you can click to see if you're a good fit. Nomadcapitalist.com. We're always looking for people who are successful business owners, investors, etc., who are considering, what do I need to do to be free and to keep more of my own money and to live life on my own terms? So definitely consider that as well.